I'm going to ask, I think, one big question to you, and then I'm going to open it up to the room for your questions. So, Narada, but first of all, you've all seen the films. How much of this resonated with you? Hands up, that you have personal experience with this, that you know people who are involved. Okay, so a few hands. All right, so there should be a lot of questions and comments. So Narada, you are a gig worker, you have organized gig workers, you have done, organizing work on the bike lane. So talk to us about gig work and what that means and your work in organizing. And I will give you the mic.
Great, thank you for that. Again, thank you for everyone for organizing this film festival. It was very good. The films were very inspiring. I watched them beforehand and then I watched them again today. Yeah, just like maybe overall, just give my quick thoughts on the films before I answer the question. The thing that struck me most about the films was like, the thing that tied them all together was the people in those films are people in forms of work that are mostly forgotten. Like in shadow work, it was about people doing work that's not paid or considered real work, but they have to do it because, as the people said in the film, they're marginalized and they feel like they need to do it to prove themselves. The Fleck film about women's rights a long time ago, we think things have changed, but have they really? Prison workers, a lot of this union work is of people trying to organize where society feels like, sure, people deserve minimum wage, people deserve labor protections, but not prison workers, not international students who are just here for a couple of years. They don't deserve as much rights as regular people. But yeah, so I'll quickly talk about how I got into the labor movement, because in 2019, I was probably someone who didn't think a lot about labor, or at least not think about it in the sense that it would be something that affected my life. And then right around 2018 is when I started doing gig work. So specifically, I worked for Uber Eats and DoorDash, if you know those companies. And then in 2019, on May 1st, a bunch of gig workers who worked for Foodora, was one of the delivery companies that was running back then, announced that they were going to start the gig workers union. And at the time, it was very difficult to start a union. Like, when we think of unions, we think, okay, if people feel like they don't have the rights that they deserve, they meet up at the lunch table or after work, and they start talking about how we get together and organize. When you get hired to work as a gig worker, you kind of just sign up for one of the apps, and it's just a button on your phone. You don't know any of the other people you work with. You might meet a handful of them when you're picking up at a restaurant or when you're delivering to someone's door. But in order to form a cohesive unit of people, to sign union cards and meet all these thresholds that legally people in Ontario have to reach to form a union, you kind of have to have like a threshold of 40% of the people to be like, I want to form a union. That's very tough to do when you don't even know 10% of the people you work in. So that was kind of the biggest hurdle to that organizing work. Thankfully, we got a lot of help from TEPW, Canadian Union of Postal Workers. They kind of gave us a lot of guidance, and they kind of assigned us mentors to kind of train us. Was a lot of reading on Jade McAlevy's work. People know who that is. And through that, we were able to kind of form this cohesive unit of people who kind of wanted to bring negotiations to the table. So we got our union card signed and went to the Ontario Labour Board. We're ready to form this union. And the board was like, no, you can't do that. In order to form a union, you have to be a worker. You're not really a worker. To quote one of the films, you're your own boss. Like, if you're a freelancer, freelance photographers can't form a union. If they're not employees. And so that was kind of one of the biggest hurdles. And I think a lot of us saw in that film is the lie we were told and what Fedora constantly said during those court sessions at the labor board, because initially it was just a matter of, do you want to form a union or not? Let's go to the bargaining table. But then there was this extra layer of abstraction that was, can you form a union? Are you a worker? Or are you just an independent contractor? And that very intense dramatic film, Your Own Boss, about the New York Courier, a lot of the times that film was giving him instructions. That film was his boss. That film was like, you're late. If you do this, you're going to get fired. Those are the thresholds of what an employee faces. And so I remember one of the many court sessions we had at the labor board, and the biggest argument the Fedora lawyers made was, oh, but you own your own delivery business. You're not an employee, and kind of a lot of what was in that film was the arguments we used against that. We're sort of being told where to go, when to go, and we're being punished if we don't do things exactly, which is kind of the threshold of what being an employee is. And then to tie that back in, so eventually the court proceedings went on, and the judge ruled that we were dependent contractors who did depend on Fedora, so they said we could form a union, and this was, so we started the union right in 2019, and the court proceedings ended in early 2020, right when COVID was hitting. And we were the first group of workers, gig workers in North America, food delivery gig workers, to try and form a union. And for the first time in all of North America, finally someone ruled that we were independent and we could form a union if we wanted to. With that major victory also came major sadness, because if you know the story of Fedora, this ruling came out in February of 2020, and in April 27th of 2020, everyone got an email on their phone from Fedora saying, oh, COVID's hit us hard, so we're going to shut down operations in Canada. Which is funny because on April 28th, the CEO of Delivery Hero, which is the parent company that owns Fedora, sent out a tweet saying, Q1 results in COVID means we've made twice the revenue we've made year over year. We're making more money than ever. Let's go. So that was kind of funny, but sad at the same time.
And you were also involved in, because when we're talking about Fedora and we're talking about gig workers and delivery workers, you need bike lanes in order to do that. That's part of your safety. That's part of the infrastructure of the job. So talk about your organizing around that.
Yeah, so the bike lane case, it's actually interesting because a lot of the bike lanes, if people remember kind of the history of how bike lanes came about, a lot of the bike lanes were installed actually during COVID as an active measure because people needed to get outside and there's a lot more cycling happening. And I think 2 of the 3 lanes that Ford wanted to tear down, University was built during COVID specifically, and there was like a big sign that said temporary for COVID, and then after that they became permanent. And so, this was last year, yeah. I got a call from someone from Cycle TO, which is an advocacy group for cyclists in Toronto, and they kind of had set things in motion to fight back against the removal of bike lanes, and they were kind of looking for different people who kind of have to use bike lanes, and it made sense. It was no brainer. Someone who spends 8 hours a day on a bicycle, that's something they need to do for work. But even more importantly is that, especially during COVID, gig work for the longest time was considered essential work. A lot of people were told to go stay home. People were allowed to eat out. A lot of the delivery companies kind of pivoted to groceries as well. So a lot of that messaging was, people, we need gig workers to make people stay home and stay safe. And yet, this ruling on the bike lanes kind of was, but also we need to remove bike lanes and not care about the safety of the explosion of people that I think a lot of people have noticed that there's a lot more people on bike lanes.
I'd like to, everybody can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. So I'd like to open this up to all of you for any questions that you have for Narada about the films, about what he is talking about what's happening with the gig economy. So any questions coming from the audience? Okay, and I'm running the mic.
And Narada, thank you very much. My name is Aiden, and thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. Now, the depiction in your own boss is that a reflection of what it's actually like to work for companies like Foodora and Uber?
That's a great question. I actually thought about asking people in the room how much they thought that was over-exaggerated for dramatic effect versus how much they think of that you think is reality. And sadly, I would say maybe 90% of it was reality. It's just that it was condensed into a single day,
Yeah.
which made it seem way more exaggerated. But I'm sure if anyone here started working in Roots tomorrow, within 6 months, you have 9 out of 10 of experiences in that.
Any other questions?
My question is because I've seen, like, on television, especially for food deliveries and stuff like that, they were fighting for unions. I attempted, it's like 2 years ago, to you do because I have a bicycle and to do the food delivery, but they asked me for so much stuff, and even they asked me for criminal record check, and me working in people's houses, they don't even ask me for that, so. Has anything changed? With all these you guys are trying to organize. Has it gotten better for you guys, or not really?
Yeah, I would say, sadly, things have gotten a lot worse, if anything. So I'm trying to get my dates right. I think in 2024 in Ontario, I think in most of Canada, things got very bad for gig workers. A lot of them are making less than minimum wage. And so this is kind of a lot of the work we're trying to do with Foodsters United and Foodora still around, was to at least guarantee that someone who goes outside and does work gets something that us as a so-called first world country and civil society consider wage for worker. Uber kind of, again, same with the Foodora case, was their argument was, oh, we can't guarantee you minimum wage because you're your own boss. You decide your own business. If someone opens up, a food stall somewhere, they're not guaranteed minimum wage through the government. So why should you? Because you own your own business. And that was the way for them to get a minimum wage. But it got so bad that the government kind of forced Uber to pay gig workers minimum wage, and that was a change that happened last year. But the interesting part of that is, and this is a change that happened actually in Canada and the US, our neighbors to the south as well. But it's also interesting to see that depending on how much worker power each city and territory had,
Sorry, depending on how much what?
power the workers in each city had, those minimum wage laws were very different. So I think in all of Canada, BC has better minimum wage laws, and I think because the drivers there were able to fight more on it, because if without the workers kind of doing any advocacy for themselves, the argument was, okay, we're going to give them $17, $18, whatever the minimum wage in that province, but the drivers argue, wait, I'm getting paid $18, but I'm putting mileage in my car and buying gas. After all that expenditure, I'm still not making minimum wage. So they were given more allowances. Ontario does not have that. But in New York, they have, there's a group there, I forget their name, but they do a lot of advocacy work for gig workers there, specifically Uber Eats. They do a lot of strikes and action. Uber Eats.
Thank you.
They do a lot of strikes and actions, and they were able to have probably the best version of that law, which is still passed on from the government, and we were having a conversation about the workers being in the group, but the pressure alone was able to make that a way better agreement. So they have things like instituted minimums on how much you're making on your shift. Because in Ontario, we are guaranteed minimum wage, but it's considered only when you're actively working. So you could leave the house at 8 a.m. and be outside 8 hours waiting to work, but only when you're between the restaurant and the customers when the minimum wage kicks in. So if you're waiting at a restaurant for 10 minutes, that's not paid time and all that. So New York is able to fight for a lot more of these things.
Was I correct in hearing that you run the film festival for St. Louis or film festival for okay? As a community worker student, and as we've been learning the different events of the 50th anniversary of the community work program, a lot of what people have been talking about is building solidarity, and you spoke a little bit about that. It was postal workers that were receiving mentorship. I was wondering about what is your network of solidarity? What are anything you want to speak about, but some talking points is like what are surprising networks of solidarities that have built really strong connections? What are solidarity or what are other advocacy groups that you'd like to be a part of that you feel like share the same interests? Anything in terms of what solidarity and networks have helped you, both creatively as well as labor?
Thank you. Yeah, great question. Maybe to answer that, I'll go back to during the Fedora campaign. A lot of our mentorship and the way we built our union was based on like a true grassroots union. We decided like very early on when we were building our union that we weren't just gonna be like a union ruled from above, where we kind of form our union and we just tell the workers, okay, this is what we want, and you can come back next year for the next general meeting. And so that just meant we needed to build a lot of networks with a lot of organizing groups. Thankfully, the people we had during that early phase were people who had already done other forms of activism, not labor related. And so, yeah, having that network of people organizing for racial rights, LGBT rights, was very helpful for us in building power for ourselves, because we did have people from all those diverse groups within the workers' union, but also to make our workership activated to show up for other people's events and activism, and also have that come back to us. So, yeah, on like when we had our May Day float, we had a lot of people join us from various other groups, and even after Fedora left during COVID, we're still doing a lot of the BLM protests and all the protests that are happening in the city. We kind of still kept in touch because we're still doing activism for people.
Okay, and we will have one more question. All right. Throw it.
Thank you so much. I'm curious, when you were organizing the other gig workers at Fedora, like, how would you just go to places where people congregate and like speak to them, or would you like you know somebody in like spreads like that, or is there like a list, or like does the app give you access to contact other workers? Like, how would you do it?
Yes, great question. On day one of forming the union, we had the exact same question. So we did eventually get a list, but the laws in Ontario, I forget the exact number, was you can request an employer give you a list if you're in the process of forming a union, so that you can, so that every worker, because when you kind of take your certification to court and say, we want to form a union and then you vote, if the worker, if the employee, if the employer is the only person on the list, they can tell everyone to vote no, which they did. They sent an email to everyone, saying, voting on the union. But to make it fair, we needed to be able to get the list also to make our case. However, there needs to be a threshold. You can't have 2 people show up to a 1,000-person workplace and say, we want to form a union, give us 998 people's personal information. Therefore, we needed to get, I think it was 20%, if I remember correctly, and that was, yeah, it was a lot of brainstorming sessions. A lot of it was going to hotspots, and just meeting people on the street and having conversations with them, street outreach. Something our mentors from CupW kind of helped us out with a lot, and this was a little bit of donations and supporters who weren't able to visit the time giving us money. So we would have these ordering days where we would have like 100 people. We'd give them $15 to order their lunch, but they would hand out a card talking about the union to the person who was delivering the door. And that was kind of, yeah. Come tell me did that. But yeah, that was one of the things you had to do, and that's kind of in a new workplace. When you go to the library and you look up books on how to form a union, stuff like that doesn't exist, because they'll just say, go to the water cooler at lunch.
And, thank you, Narada, and that the world of work is changing. I mean, we're in a time of incredible change. But what is so heartening is that we have people like you and so many others who are up to the challenge and up to the changes and are continuing to organize for labor rights and for the rights of all people. So thank you so much for being with us. And thank you to all of you, and we would also like to present you with our Labor Fair gift. So thank you everyone for joining us here tonight. There's some more popcorn, there's stuff, candy floss, and also I would like to thank the organizers. Thank you to John for putting this all together. And join us for the rest of the Labor Fair program, wherever you can tune in, so you can scan the QR code on the posters to check out the events. We have a lot of other, I think on Thursday and Friday, but we also have another session. Who's speaking? Oh, and so we also have a session tomorrow evening online on wage theft, which also by the Workers' Action Center at Brock University is bringing that. So tune in for that, and thank you all again, and yeah, get home safe.